Hey, everybody. Super excited to announce this next speaker. This person was literally the first person I looked up to when I went into sales leadership along the way. He took HubSpot from 0 to 100 million in ARR. He's a sales scientist, MIT quant, sought after keynote speaker, also a professor at Harvard, author of the bestseller Sales Acceleration Formula, right now managing director of Stage 2 Capital. This is Mark Roberge talking about PLG. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Jared, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Welcome.
it's my video come up. And you can just to test this, Jared, you can see my screen okay?
Yep, everything's looking good on the screen.
Awesome, man. Okay, let's see if I can. How do you go forward? Sorry. Do you know? And I'll get right into this.
Yeah. The
Maybe I have to
next
go back here.
slot.
Did this go? Did it go?
Yep, it did.
Okay, cool. All
Even
right,
on.
sorry about that, everyone. Hey, everyone, this is it's awesome to be here. Big fan of Jared, big fan of the show, and support this cause. So hope everyone's been having an awesome time in it. So yeah, I am so psyched about the PLG movement. I don't know if you all are part of it, but even if you're not, I want to like provoke some thought because it might be really important for you. I personally think the PLG movement is extremely comparable to the SaaS movement over the last 20 years. How much did SaaS change the world of B2B tech? Oh, what has been bigger than SaaS and B2B tech? I mean, it almost is B2B tech. And it was so disruptive. And I remember in like 2000, the early part of the century, like 2002, 2003, whatever, and the first SaaS companies were coming out. And so many of the public equity analysts were skeptical. They're like, this will never work. Like, what CTO is going to put their data in the cloud? And all of a sudden, a couple early movers like Salesforce was making traction and like, some of the HR tech plays were making traction and all of a sudden then AWS came together and like all of a sudden like people were putting their stuff in the cloud and they were saving all this money and it was like they were saving all this maintenance benefits and like efficiencies and here we are, right? Like 22 years later and they're just dominating the public equity markets. And it's very, very difficult for the on-premise incumbents to transition. I think we have the same opportunity for PLG, product-led growth. It's not as pervasive. Like SaaS applied to almost every tech category. But for the categories that it does apply to, I think PLG is going to dominate that category. And I think it's going to be very difficult for a non-PLG company to continue to expand market share and defend themselves. And what's also interesting is just like SaaS, the public equity markets, I think, are skeptical of the business model. And what's also interesting is just like SaaS, it's going to be very difficult for the non-PLG incumbents to defend their territory and move to PLG once they get wind of this. This is such an opportunity for entrepreneurs. And so I've been so into this. First off, like we did this at HubSpot with the CRM. And so I got some operational experience within this environment and then helped a bunch of companies. Like I was on the advisory board at Asana. I spent a lot of time with Atlassian and with Dropbox and Slack and a lot of different players. And he got so excited about this, I actually started a class around this topic at Harvard Business School 3 years ago. So I've been able to bring in a lot of these growth leaders. And one connection you have to kind of understand for a second is some people call this trend the consumerization of software. I like that. And if you believe that, then one could hypothesize that we can look to the modern consumer tech winners for inspiration on how to run our growth teams in PLG, B2B PLG. And as I've explored that, I think that connection is actually quite profound and inspirational. And so in this class, I've been fortunate to have invited in to teach us the growth leaders from those big B2C tech winners like Pinterest and Lyft and Facebook and LinkedIn, and also the B2B growth winners like Shopify and Slack and Dropbox. And I want to tell you kind of some of the themes that I'm seeing. And the first one is like, if you ask, I always tell my students, I'm like, in the world of tech, like San Francisco has just crushed it in the last 20 years. Like, how many amazing companies born after the year like 1998 or something that are just the top 100 today in tech were born out of San Francisco? There is magic happening there. And when you go and talk to those founders, a lot of them say the reason we did it was the creation and execution of our growth team. What is happening in that growth team? This is a separate team. There's product, there's engineering, there's finance, there's HR, there's sales, there's marketing, there's customer success, and then there's growth. And what the heck do they do? People who don't live in these environments are like, I don't know. And so that's what we want to kind of talk a little bit. We'll lay the groundwork for it initially, and then we'll talk about how to layer on top of it more of a traditional go-to-market to not ruin things, all right? So what does the growth team do? Like, this isn't profound, you probably know this, but like they essentially own that humanless funnel, right? Whether you're in a B2C play like a Lyft, they're trying to like get someone to download the app and take a ride, or a Pinterest to set up an account and start posting some stuff or like looking at some content, or on the B2B side at Shopify to set up your e-commerce site, or at Asana's to set up a project. Like all that's happening humanlessly, and that's what the growth team does. Is they study that, and there's a couple observations that I've had which represent an enormous gap between what these best-in-class unicorns have been doing in those growth teams and when I talk to founders who want to do PLG are doing. Big gap. And I think that represents opportunity and represents learning. So I'll start with 3 observations. The first one is these best-in-class growth teams evolve their North Star metric through 4 evolutions. And what I find with the founders is they normally start with a North Star metric that is focused on revenue generation and monetization. And that's actually the last thing that these growth companies focus on. Now, like I know, like roll your eyes, well, we can't all raise $50 million in venture capital, but some of them didn't either. Like there's ways to do this on seed funding. There's ways to do this when you bootstrap even. It's like blood, sweat, and tears to get there. But bottom line is they first focus on forcing predictably like a user flow into this funnel enough to do experiments every week. I don't know what the right number is. It's like something like 100 or more new users a week so that we can do statistically relevant experiments as fast as possible. And this is where these companies use like paid ads or some way to controllably, like without regard of cost, it's not going to cost millions of dollars, but it's certainly not going to be economically feasible to get like 100 users plus a week in here so we can experiment. And then they focus on free user retention. This is the step that like few startups prioritize early, few startups ever achieve. And someday I would love to do a research project on how many startups that actually got healthy free user retention ended up succeeding, because I think it would be exponentially higher than the average like success rate of even like a Series A funded startup, right? And so the way that there's 2 really common ways to measure free user retention today. One is a leading indicator to the other. So one is on the left created by Sean Ellis, where even if you have dozens of users, so don't quite have like statistical relevance to do a lot of analysis, but dozens of users where you can do a survey and just ask them like, how disappointed would you be if our product didn't exist? And Sean argues if you get 40% of above, he's seeing a lot of correlation to long-term product market fit. And so that's a really cool approach early on when you're just getting started. But surveys are riddled with like false positive concern, right? So we have to evolve to something more sustainable. And that's where Brian Belfour from Reforge, who actually worked with us at HubSpot on growth, uses user cohorts. So in this case, like each one of these colors is how many users were acquired in a month. So when you can see here, like January 14th, I guess we're actually looking monthly here. So January, we acquired like 10,000 users in the blue, and the red is like in February we acquired looks like another 12,000 users. And the question is like, how many are still active as the months go by? Each one of these cohorts has to flatline somewhere. If you're acquiring free users, and over weeks, months, quarters, it goes to zero, there's no business. Don't worry about monetization, you're cooked. This is critical. And most startups aren't even measuring this. So whether it's weekly or monthly or whatever, and even if it's like, again, 100 plus folks in your cohorts, you got to measure that and see where it flatlines. If you get to flatline, you've done something that few entrepreneurs ever achieve. And I think you've like dramatically increased your likelihood of success. I think a lot of the other stuff is going to take care of itself. Hard work, but it will happen. Okay, so then once they get that free user attention proven, then they move to how do I acquire users scalably? Because at this point, I'm like forcing users in through paid ads. It's not economical. Like the cost per user acquired is way higher than the potential LTV. I remember when we first did this at the HubSpot CRM, our cost per free user acquired was $100, and we just weren't going to like monetize our free users at that level. But the team ran like 20 experiments or so in that month and got it down to $12. That's how these teams are operating, right? So this is where we're trying to figure out how to acquire users scalably. This is where things like content marketing or virality or maybe even like marketplace partnerships or virality within the marketplaces come into play. And then finally, they focus on monetization, right? So just a huge gap that I see between the unicorns on both the consumer tech side and the growth teams, as well as the B2B PLG teams, and how founders are thinking, who are coming out of the gate focused on revenue, right? Okay, number two is the way they operate is they're just running experiments all day. They're literally scientists. They're just running the scientific method. Like literally these growth teams have no idea what they're doing next week. It depends on what our experiments outcomes are today. They're in weekly stand-ups and they're saying, what was the experiment you ran? How did it go? What were the results? What did you learn? Everybody else, what do you learn? And based on that, what experiment are we going to do next? And they're very data driven. They're literally like focused on like, okay, fine, our activation rate today on average is like 71%. And our goal in the next 4 weeks is to get to 79%. That's how they're thinking. All right, they're segmenting this stuff. This is another confusion point for these companies is like, you can't be everything to everyone, right? Like just because you came in with like, okay, we had 500 users enter the funnel over the last 2 weeks. Like, I don't really care that like you get free user attention to work for all of them. Because some of them could be perfect fit like designers at like a tech company in the US, which is who you're building it for. And some of them could be like academic researchers in like Japan who are just like doing a project. You're not building it for that other user. So you've got to segment down your user base and only focus on the ones that represent your target market. As long as that market's big enough to get you the first tens of millions of dollars to scale, that's fine. We can figure out the second act. But don't be confused that you have to like do this for everybody and get it to work for everyone. And the final point on the right, which is shocking to me, is the amount of time that these like growth unicorns spend their engineering time on building infrastructure that makes it easy for the whole company to run experiments, especially non-technical resources. Like literally, like I've read stuff that like and talked to these folks as saying like upwards of half of the engineering effort is not spent on consumer or customer facing tools, but is instead spent on building the infrastructure so that some 22-year-old MIT grad can come into the company and run an experiment without breaking the whole system and without bothering the rest of the engineering team. Or some marketer can come in and have absolutely no technical experience and run experiments in their in-app notification module without bothering an engineer. Makes sense when you think about it. So if you're going down that path, just keep that in mind. That's what the best-in-class folks are doing. They're also maintaining an experiment log, a very detailed one. It takes like 5 minutes. What are we doing? How do you set it up? What's our hypothesis on what's going to happen? Give me the details on the design. What might be the limitations? What were the results? And what did we learn from it? And what's the next step? 5 minutes. And what's great about this is as you scale and new people come into the growth team, they literally can spend like the first day reading all of your experiments over the last 6 months and kind of be like right there with the rest of the team on like what we've learned and where we're going. So this is what they're doing. Okay, the third one is they're working in cross-functional teams. They're not doing like marketing on one side and product and engineering on one side, where marketing is running user acquisition and product and engineering are running user retention and monetization. They're not doing that. They're putting them all together for one, because as the North Star metric progresses, we want everybody working on that one thing. If we're working on activation this month, let's all work on activation. Marketers and product and engineering. If we're working on monetization, let's all work on monetization. The other thing is it gets rid of that whole alignment issue, which happens in a lot of these growth teams that don't set these things up right. Is like products like, hey, product, you're supposed to own retention and monetization. And they're like, yeah, well, I'm trying to, but like the marketers are sending me terrible users. They're sending us users that we didn't build this thing for. And then marketing's like, well, what are you talking about? Like product has an unrealistic expectation. They want me to find like left-handed plumbers in Arkansas. It's like, that's impossible. So it gets rid of that like misalignment. It's just like everyone is not solving on a local maximum, but they're working together. It's like we own acquisition, retention, and monetization together. So let's work together as a cross-functional team and make that happen. Right? And this is kind of a viewpoint on like how these evolve. Right? Like at the seed stage, like, you got $1 million in funding, you got like 2 or 3 people. And they're like kind of athletes, like the product managers in there. Maybe they have some marketing skills, the engineers in there. Maybe they have some design skills. Like it's just 2 or 3 people that are working on this. And then when you get to the A, you have more specialists. You have a good product manager. You have like a full stack engineer. You have a couple designers. You might have a marketer. You might have a data analyst or data scientist. And then once you get to that like C and D and E stage, you have separate growth teams for each product or feature, right? Like at Lyft, they have a growth team for riders and they have a growth team for drivers, right? So you start to get a little specialization around these isolated feature sets or products. Okay. So hopefully that gives us a sense of like, what are the gaps generally around, like, what is this growth team? What do they do? And what are best-in-class companies doing that is different than the entrepreneur ecosystem? All right. Now, what happens when we layer on salespeople and go to market? How do we do that well? Because that's scary. That's scary for these product founders who are like, oh my gosh, now I'm going to introduce salespeople. Like, is that going to destroy our culture? Is that going to destroy the magic that we've created with this like free user, activation, retention, and upgrades that's happening? I don't want to ruin that. So let's talk about some things on how to do that. Okay, the first thing is, and again, these are analysis of the most successful companies compared to like the startups. All the successful companies have growth reporting to product, and all the startups have growth reporting to marketing. Okay, and that's a problem when they report to marketing, because when growth reports to marketing, then you're not going to get any engineers. Like you go ask an engineer, hey, would you like to go work in marketing? Like, no, they don't want to. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know why. I don't know what their beef is against marketing. They don't want to go into marketing. Okay. And when you don't have engineers on your growth team, then your growth team is limited to experimentation on the top of the funnel. And you're going to get B, because your competition puts the growth team in product. Marketers are willing to work in product. And because you're positioned in product, then now you have a cross-functional team, and your experimentation footprint is full funnel. It's user acquisition, it's user activation, it's user retention, it's user monetization, and you're going to win. Now, I put an asterisk there because as I've spoken to different people, I get questions, and they're good questions. And one question is, well, This is concerning because I'm a marketer and I don't want to work in product because they're going to turn me into a product marketer. That's not the case here. Because if this company set up product correctly, product and engineering, what happens is you actually like specialize the team into core product and growth. The core product team is where they're running product roadmap. They're doing the roadmap, they're building features. And if you're a marketer working in there, yes, you're going to be a product marketer. You're going to be writing about what the product does, and that's for certain people. If you're a marketer in growth, because growth is running the self-serve funnel, you're a demand gen performance marketer. That's what you are. Okay, so I hear the concern, but like that's how these folks set it up, and you don't become a product marketer if you're a marketer that works on the growth team that reports in the product. Okay, the second one is scaling sales disproportionately to the growth funnel, right? So it's like you got this beautiful funnel coming in, and there's a certain number of like PQLs they usually call them, product qualified leads. So it's like the user comes in and the self-serve funnel happens when they activate and they experience value and they become a power user. And at some point in that journey, your sales team's going to call them. And that's beautiful. It's like a product qualified lead. It's like they've already seen value in the product. And now you're just like educating them on like the enterprise version or a more advanced version they could benefit from. And so what happens is if you scale the sales team faster than you're scaling the top of the funnel PQLs, then the sales team obviously has a quota and they're going to get desperate. And they're going to start calling on these users before they've even adopted. And when they start calling on these users before they've adopted, you ruin the sort of adopt before buy context and experience that PLG creates. And salespeople are going to start demoing and pitching and taking money from customers before they've decided if this is even the right product for us. And now we get sucked into higher CAC and higher churn, and things get bad. Okay, so you have to kind of measure your PQL per salesperson to make sure that that's actually going up or staying flat and not declining. Okay, so as long as you do that, as long as you scale that top of the funnel, that growth funnel, faster or equal to the scaling of your sales team, then the magic continues. And they will just continue to call PQLs after they've adopted. They can retain that adopt before buy magic that PLG creates, and your CAC and retention will stay in like world-class territory. Okay. Now, one of the reasons why that mistake number 2 happens is partially driven by the compensation plan as well. Because we still are using kind of compensation plans that were born of the 1980s, where it's like I'm a salesperson and I get paid mostly for the first revenue from an account and less for the expansion revenue from an account. And that made sense. Imagine if we were selling Siebel, or like, let me generalize it because I might be a little mean here, but like, let's say we were selling like an on-premise 1980s oriented software product. And back then, all these products were more like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of sales. They were usually 18-month sales cycles. And once you bought it, you bought it. Like you were stuck, right? Like the retention was the sale because once they bought it, they installed like 50 servers in the basement and hooked it up to a local area network and went through a 6-month training program for the whole company and signed a 4-year contract with maintenance fees. And that was it. It was the sale. And that makes sense to pay the salesperson on that first event. That was the whole event. And the best sales team won. And the products kind of sucked back then. That's why there's a term called shelfware, because they weren't used, because they were hard to use. It was all about the sale. And so, it's like, but now when you apply that compensation model to today's environment, especially a PLG company, it's like, okay, the buyer says, hey, I love your product. I'm so glad you called. I would love to upgrade to the pro version. And the seller says, you need to upgrade the whole team. And the person's like, why? I just want to upgrade myself or like my department. I don't want to upgrade like the whole company. And the salesperson makes up some lie, but the real reason is because that's how I get paid. I'm getting most of my pay for the first revenue from your company. And like, I don't want you to sign up and then you to sign up the rest of your company like next spring, because I'm not going to make any money off that. And so that's going to cause like a buy before adopt manner that we just talked about, and that's going to increase CAC and decrease retention. And so if you, instead you like flip it on its head, and in a modern environment, pay your salespeople more for the expansion, which by the way, I did at HubSpot in the CRM and it worked beautifully, then you've got a dialogue that's more aligned, where the buyer says, hey, I love your product. I've been using it for 2 months and I would love to upgrade to the pro version. And the salesperson says, great, let's do that. And by the way, I noticed that there's a bunch of other designers at your company. Should we just set them up with a free account? And it's like, yeah, let's do it. And they set them up with a free account. And now you've retained this adopt before buy magic, and you retain all the beautiful unit economics that come with that. So just like be careful, and like you wouldn't suspect that your sales comp model is the thing that's gonna like ruin the magic of PLG, but it can. Okay. Though just one little point, because this is a question that people have, is like, I'm not trying to turn the salesperson into a CSM here. It's really just about expectation setting. The accounts can still be managed by the CSM. It's just like, talk to your CFO. There's a way to get like not to have your CAC blow up by compensating the salesperson more for the expansion revenue and also having the CSM play ball in that. There's a way to work that out. I'm not trying to get the salesperson to become a CSM. And then finally, like the pricing model can really hurt things too, right? So let's just look at like the adoption cycle here of a like a PLG user. They set it up, they hit the aha moment. Ooh, this thing's valuable. Then they become a power user. Then they tell their friends and the team engages it. Then the CIO finds out and they have to like buy the enterprise version. So wherever you put the pricing creates friction. So where do you want to create friction? Like very few PLG companies put it at the setup. That's fine. Like we wouldn't want to do that. But a lot of them put it at the ha-ha moment. That's fine. Like it is what it is. And some people wait till they're a power user and like put it more at like the virality, and that's just putting friction on virality. I think if possible, you put the friction on the executive needs. It's like, oh gosh, our whole company loves this thing. I just need to like lock it down. Like I need admin rights and integrate it with the tech stack and like get executive reporting, because no user is going to look at that and be like they don't really care about that. They just want to be able to use a lot of it. Because as we see these categories adopted, we're starting to see users look beyond the free price and look how much they can get. Like if I'm choosing between Google Drive and Dropbox is giving me 2 gigs for free, and Google Drive is giving me 20 gigs for free, even though they're both free to start, people are thinking about that. And I'm wondering as categories evolve if we end up in that spot. Okay. So I think like I'm a little like, so just a couple quick like lightning round things like, well, what if we try this in and we fail? Don't be afraid of that. Like if you're starting out and you're like, yeah, I don't know if PLG will work, and you try it out and it fails, you just end up with a really low friction sales-led growth environment. Really easy to use adopt product. It's easy to move. But if you go sales-led growth and you grow, like it's really hard to go to PLG because you got like now 1 million, 2 million of ARR through sales-led growth, and now you're trying to introduce some free product. It's next to impossible to craft like what that free product could be that's not going to cannibalize that $2 million. So that's why it's like really important to try this early. And I've got a blog post if you want to like, I mentioned in the beginning, like PLG is not as pervasive as SaaS, but for the categories it applies to, it's going to dominate. And this is just an article I wrote about like how do you know if your category is one that's ripe for PLG? Okay. So anyway, just real quick, like I don't know if you've heard of Stage 2 Capital, but we do a lot of work with this stuff in B2B software. We're the first VC firm that's running backed by hundreds of go-to-market leaders, CROs, CMOs, CCOs of like Snowflake and Toast and Okta, Asana, Zoom and Workday and Dropbox and Twilio and all these companies. We have both a flagship fund where companies are around $1 million in revenue, We give them money, and we also have an accelerator that we run, and we put out a lot of content if you want to check that out. So that's my show. I'll get back to Jared here. And I know I went a little, I'm like right on time, Jared. Sorry, so I don't know if we have time.
Mark, fun fact, since we spoke last, you said that Brian Balfour, best head of growth that you had, the pleasure of working with. I've joined Reforge myself, so I have so many questions.
Yes. Now that he was actually ironically just in my class at Harvard yesterday. So we got to catch up, and I'm so glad that you're in that school, because Balfour runs the VForge school. Check it out. They have like an enormous MPS, and is like really putting out amazing content on growth, whether you're on the consumer or B2B PLG side.
Just going through it, I feel I feel like I could enter any room on the topic. It is spectacular. It really is. Like last night I was with the CMO of Optimizely, right? Like the one during Obama.
It's crazy, man. Crazy.
But anyway, I digress. Like we'll keep it going with the questions. There's one quick one here, if you could answer it. Is there ever a time when you move growth away from product? Like, is there a scale or size of a company where the growth team has their own space rather than under product?
I think so. Like, to be quite frank, I'm not an expert in that question. And as I look across, like, I guess I'm not an expert from like an operator that made that call and watch it. I guess like I'm knowledgeable in the sense that I've seen like 30 of these at unicorn scale, and pretty much all of them still are in product, but they're implemented in different ways. For example, like I can't say the names of these because like some of this is confidential, but like one like very large consumer tech company, you all know, they have more of like a growth center of excellence, and all these growth specialists that parachute into existing product teams to make them operate more growth oriented for a period of time. And that has its pros and cons to it. The pros are like that team will own that code forever and think about long-term sustainability. The cons are they probably won't go as fast as a purebred growth team, versus like purebred growth teams may take ownership of a product for 2 years and then move it into more of the like core product team. And that's huge for like pace of experimentation, but it really demotivates the core product team because they get this product back that's like spaghetti code because it's been experimented so quickly, and they feel like all they're doing is cleaning stuff up, right? So like I don't know if like I think the industry is still trying to feel it out. So there's certainly different ways that the growth team interacts and is embedded in product, but I'm not sure if I know of a scalable data point where growth has been extracted out.
And from a personal standpoint, I look at growth, acquisition, activation, retention, right? Like those are still important things when you get into the sales motions as well. They're just handled by different people. Is the new age RevOps person kind of like the growth operator for the humans part of it?
Yeah, they're typically like data analysts and scientists. Like at scale, you'll have someone that is in charge of deploying the tech stack to mobilize and measure the growth funnel. It's different than our sales tech stack, HubSpot, Salesforce, like Outreach, SalesLoft, whatever. It's more like Mixpanel, Amplitude, like Looker, maybe a Snowflake. Like there's a different tech stack in there because it's high transactions and like a lot of segmentation and cohort analysis. But yeah, that data scientist or data analyst is in charge of instrumenting that, making sure it's accurate, and surfacing insights to the team to make sure that they're learning effectively.
I love it, Mark. Well, thank you for your time. Always great to have you around. Thank you all for watching. We'll push you to the next session and really appreciate you, Mark.
Yeah, you bet, Jared. Thank you.